This is Tales from the Cube, a podcast about call centers, what it's like to work in them, the good, the bad, the ugly, the funny and not so funny side of what it's like working in a call center. Hi, this is episode 23016 of the podcast. I am Cliff Tour, and today, in this episode, we are going to touch on a hot, and I do mean hot topic. Some may consider this a third rail topic. True, it may stimulate some electrifying conversation, but it's still a topic I want to dive into. For the most part, call centers do not have unions. They tend to be disliked by employers, and some employees are not fans as well. The question is, do they even have a place in call centers? In this episode, I will share some thoughts on that question and explore how a union would work in a call center. I've actually been in the unionized type call centers, so I've done this before. In Canada and in each and every province except for some groups, most employees have the right to join a union. This includes call center workers. No employer has the right to interfere with organizing efforts, so nobody can do that. Companies like Walmart have been able to scare off staff into joining a union, and those stores with unions were certified or at one time, and then they either closed or the union was decertified because Walmart technically would not in any way, shape, or form negotiate a deal with the union by using delaying tactics. For the most part, Walmart gets away with this anti-union tactic, but there are costs and there are cases where the company has been forced to pay fines in the past. The cost being, of course, their reputation and, of course, the compensation for doing what they are doing. The most notable for this was the closing of a store in Jonquière, Quebec. Canada's Supreme Court ruled that the company violated Quebec's labor law by altering working conditions while the store's staff were employed and part of a union. The change in working conditions amounted to a form of retaliation for organizing. In short, the court said you cannot interfere with staff organizing a union or retaliate against them for doing so. It's not acceptable. So basically, it's a very, very strong tenet in this country that you do not interfere with union organizing. You just don't do that as a company. Now, I did take a look to see whether or not the employees were fully compensated even more money outside of their severance for when they lost the jobs. The 190 staff at the Jonquière store, they probably got some extra money in compensation for that, but they also got their severance pay as well. So, and the company was not too happy. Walmart said this was not fair. We closed the store because of economic reasons. It wasn't profitable, but the court said, yeah, that's fine. You're good where that's concerned, but you still did something to interfere with a union, and therefore you have to pay extra money for what you did. I would want to clarify here for journalistic reasons that I am not saying one should or should not join a union. This is your choice. You should know the rules, and you should understand what it really means to join and be a part of a union. And you should know a bit about your employer and how they operate. One needs to consider what the impact would be and also whether or not your workplace is suitable for a union. You have to really consider this. This is something that is not just willy-nilly. You really do have to be aware of what you are doing, because the bottom line is you're impacting your workplace in a lot of ways. I'll explain that as we go forward. So after the short break, I'm going to dive into the rules, what can and cannot be done during union organizing drives. So stick around. I'll be right back in a few moments. Hi, I'm Cliff. I'm the host of Tales from the Cube, the podcast that you're currently listening to. The one that talks about call centers and what it's like to work in them. I'd love to have you advertise with us here on the podcast. All you need to do is send me an email to foureyesfreelancing@gmail.com. That's the number 4, EYESFREELANCING @gmail.com. Put in the subject line Tales or Advertise in Tales. I'll get a package set up for you, and basically it will be in the form of a 30, 45, or 60-second ad You can get that right here on the podcast. And you know what? Why don't you do that right now? Why don't you click on that email, send it off to me, and I will get together with you and talk about the details about what we're going to do next to get your story told right here in the podcast. Now, let's get back to the show. Okay, let's talk about the rules. Mostly the rules are the same across Canada, but there may be some variations. I'm here in Ontario, so I'm going to be talking about the rules that apply here in Ontario. So first and foremost, employees are prohibited from soliciting another employee to join a union during working hours. You can on a break, you can make mention of it, but the bottom line is I wouldn't do that. Okay, I would never suggest, even in a break situation, going and talking to your fellow colleagues about a union in your workplace, specifically in a call center, in the lunchroom, or in the break room. Not really a kosher idea. You want to take this effort offline from the workplace. You want to take it outside and, set up some chat groups outside of it, or a website, place where you can go and talk about this, but please don't do it on the company property, even during breaks. It's not something you want to do that. The Association of Employees may not meet at the place of employment during the union effort. All right, the certification process has to be free and fair, and it is something that is important to understand, that it is a process, and you cannot do this on the or in the place of employment. So you cannot run your campaign in the space where you're working. Employees or associations of employees that do not comply with these two rules are subject to fines ranging from $100 to $500 for a first offense, and $1,000 to $5,000 for each subsequent violation. So for each subsequent violation, you're going to pay up to $5,000. So that's how strict these rules really are. You just don't want to mess with them. Just obey the rules and you'll be okay. So no talking about it on the floor, no talking about it during a break. Do it outside. You cannot do anything in the way of a campaign on the work floor, in the product area where you are working, or production area you're working. You cannot, in any way, shape, or form, organize a union. Doing the drive has to be really technically outside of the workplace. The Labor Code also provides for criminal recourse against a union that intimidates employees to force them to become members. So that is a crime, actually, to do that. Just as it's bad for employers to say something about a union, like a Walmart, it's just as bad for the union to do that. So they cannot come up to you and say, your buddies are all joining, they've all signed cards, why don't you? They cannot intimidate you. It's a no-no. They can face fines and they can face jail time to a very serious tune. So essentially, you cannot in any way, shape, or form interfere with their organizing, but you also cannot make it so difficult for a person to decide. You have to let them freely choose whether or not they want to join a union. That's the law in Canada. Call center or not, that's the way this works. You cannot interfere with the union, but you also cannot be intimidated by the union to join. So there are some obligations that we have gone over, but there's also some rights and limitations for the employer. And so you should understand that employers need to be aware and particularly vigilant when the communication side is engaged here with employees. There are several rules that you should be following if you're an employer. So you may not try to influence, dominate, hinder, or finance the formation or activities of an association of employees. You can't even participate in one. So oddly enough, if you're a boss who's pro-union, you're not allowed to be in the union. It's for the employees. You cannot, even though you're pro-union. And in one sense, that would be good if you're a pro-union person and you want in your workplace to have a union. I'm sure the union would be happy to work with you. Most employers are not pro-union, so it's probably never going to be the case where they would do these things. But again, let me reiterate, you may not try to influence, dominate, hinder, or finance the formation of activities of any association of employee or to participate in a union. Okay, you cannot be a part of the union if you're a boss, if you're the owner of the company. Even if you are pro-union, you're not allowed. You may not discriminate or retaliate against individuals or intimidate them because they are involved or support a unionization process. So the bottom line is you can't make their life hell. You can't threaten their jobs. You can't tell them they're going to, lose their pay, or that a union is, and Walmart actually has done this, and I'm kind of picking on them a little bit, and it's not to be mean or not fair to them. This is fact. They've done this. They've actually said that unions are businesses. Well, to a degree, it's sort of true, but it's not exactly true. They're not businesses. They are organizations, sort of political in a lot of ways, but they're there to help employees get a better and more equal share of the pie and a balanced and more fair workspace to work in. That's the way they're generally operating. So you can't say things like that. You can't intimidate people. You can't do stuff like that. You may not oppose the union in any way. Let me reiterate that. You may not oppose the union in any way, in a letter or email or in conversation. You have the right to respectfully inform your employees of their rights without making either threats or promises. Remember, you cannot do this. It's totally reasonable to suggest that your employees ensure that they have the facts before making such an important decision for their workplace. Okay? It's important that you do this. It's very, very important to do this, because the bottom line is you want to have a clear understanding with your staff. Here's the facts. Here's what you're going to have done here if you go forward with this. These are the things that are going to occur. Again, I'm going to go over this nearer to the end of this podcast. I'll explain how this all gels into place and how it could or could not work in a call center. So good practices for working within a unionization campaign for the duration of such. Make yourself available to discuss employee concerns. In other words, talk to your staff. If you are asked to reassure employees that you will not send their personal information to union organizers without their permission, okay, make sure that you do that. Let's see here. Your workers must feel free to decide whether or not to hear or receive your message. You cannot organize meetings to share your point of view during working hours. Let me reiterate that. You cannot organize meetings to share your point of view during working hours. No. No staff meetings about the union. Remember, you cannot do this. Both sides cannot do this. Okay. However, organizing such meetings outside of work hours is possible if your staff do it voluntarily. If they participate in a voluntary manner, it's okay. Remember what I said, for both sides, you're doing this outside the workplace, not inside the workplace. Avoid making any threats or promises. Again, it's been reiterated here, whether directly or indirectly, to lead employees to adapt and adopt your point of view, to adapt to your way. So if you're one of these call centers, and there are a lot of call centers that do the we say you do kind of thing, no, this is our way, you're going to do it. You got to avoid doing that, because the bottom line is that if there's an organization that's come in and basically starting the certification process for a union, and you go forward and you try to interfere with that, you're going to get in trouble. You must not in any way use your authority as an employer to spread your opposition to unionization. You can't do that. Simple as that. We know most people in North America particularly, and in Canada and the US in general, who are business owners, are not fans of unions. But you can't oppose it. You can't, stomp your foot down and say, no, you're not having a union. You have to let this be a free and fair process. And I keep going over this because I want to really drill it home to you. I really want to get it into your brain as a staff member who is in a management role, that if your staff is going forward and deciding that they want a union, you have to let them do it. You have to cooperate in that manner. You can still say that here's the facts. You can still say here's the situation that will occur once you do certify. Here are all the rules that apply. Here are all the facts that you need to have. You have to do all of that stuff, but you cannot influence in any way, shape, or form a negative positioning against the union or a positive. You have to just simply give the facts. This is what's going to happen. Here's how it will work. And this is the impact it may have with regard to how we do our work. So that you can do. So what do I think about unions and a call center? I'll let you know on the other side. Hi, I'm Clip. I'm the host of Tales from the Cube, the podcast that you're currently listening to. You know, the one that talks about call centers and what it's like to work in them. I'd love to have you advertise with us here on the podcast. All you need to do is send me an email to 4eyesfreelancing@gmail.com. That's the number 4, EYESFREELANCING @gmail.com. Put in the subject line Tales or advertising Tales. I'll get a package set up for you, and basically it will be in the form of a 30, 45, or 60-second ad. You can get that right here on the podcast. And you know what? Why don't you do that right now? Why don't you click on that email, send it off to me, and I will get together with you and talk about the details about what we're going to do next to get your story told right here in the podcast. Now, let's get back to the show. Okay, we're back. And so, as I mentioned, I've been in a couple of call centers that have had unions. And before working in call centers, I was a broadcaster. I worked for a couple of stations, and well, not really a couple of stations, yeah, voluntarily. But two entities I worked for were CFMU and the CBC. And the CBC, all of their workers, except for management staff, are unionized. Every one of them. So there are different bargaining units in there. There are different unions that are there. I was part of a group that no longer exists. It's known as, or was known as, the National Association of Broadcast Employees and Technicians. I was a member of that. I was also a member of the Paper and Woodworkers Union when I worked for a company called Minex, who had taken over a company called Phonetics and Telecom that were unionized. Interestingly enough, eventually the union decertified at Minex, and that was a call center in Toronto. They decertified their union. And I think the reason being, and it was probably a good idea, was because it really wasn't effective. Because most of the jobs that were being done were of a call center nature that was outbound in scope. So for an outbound center, I would say this is probably not something that's going to work well for you as a call center. You should understand that if you're in the sales element, and you go into unionization and you certify, that's going to impact your bonuses. It's going to impact the way you work, particularly as far as how the call is going to go, how things are going to be done. In general, everything will pretty much stay the same, but you might have lower or no bonuses. You might have other things that are not going to be doable because they might be considered as favoritism, and unions don't like that. So you want to make sure to be aware that if you're in an outbound campaign and most of your call center work is outbound, that's going to be a problem. So where do I think that it would work well? Customer service inbound. Again, though, it could impact things like bonuses and extra incentives and things like that, because, again, we don't want to show favoritism. But it still could work for a lot of people. It could possibly, be something that works well. I have to admit, when I was working with Bell Canada and I was a part of their union, it did work very well. And we were able to get incentives and bonuses because it was built in. The union agreed to these things. So it can be done. And that would be something that a bargaining unit would negotiate. Here's how we would like to do this. How's this idea? What's that? So let's talk about what happens when you get into the phase of certification. So first and foremost, you need to understand in Ontario and probably in other parts of Canada, you need a specific number of people to sign cards. So in a call center, for example, that has about, I don't know, we'll go with 200 staff, okay? If you have 200 staff, 40% of that staff have to sign cards. So that's just under 100 people, about 90 people have to sign cards. Then what happens is the Labor Relations Board, who administers the code, basically comes in and sets up a vote. They make sure the certification process is working well and has been approved and properly done as far as signing cards, that the union hasn't done anything wrong, and also that employees haven't done anything wrong. If they see everything works out and pans out to the exact way that they want, then basically you go ahead and do a vote. Now, once the vote is done, they calculate it, tabulate it. It has to be 50% or better for the union to be certified. I would say it's best if you have 60%. If you have 50, you probably don't want to certify. But at 60%, you're definitely going to be good to go. I'm sure that it would work out well for you as far as certification goes. The next step, you put together your president, treasurer, and other officials within the union, like shop stewards, and you begin to build what's known as a collective agreement. So you set up a bargaining unit, you go to the employer and say, okay, we want to do this. And you begin to negotiate things like pay, vacation, how the calls might work, what is something that will be grievable as a retaliation, or not so much retaliation, but as a response to a corrective action. We're going to grieve that. We're not going to grieve this. We'll be okay with that. We'll not be okay with this. So one of the things, for example, that is common in most call centers nowadays is the customer satisfaction survey. A pet peeve of mine, I really don't like them. I find that they tend to be more arbitrary than anything else and are not science-based. So if I were a part of a bargaining unit, I would probably want to go to my employer and say, that's not something you can do a corrective action on anymore. We're going to grieve those. Every time, we're going to grieve them. So basically, we want that in the contract that you cannot use a corrective action against us except in certain cases. So we would say, okay, we'll agree that if the CSAT is at X amount of percentage, that's correctable. But if it's only like 10% off with a base that you want, no. But if it's like, 30, 40, or 50% off, yeah, that's correctable action. We'll go with that. But generally speaking, if you're only 5% off of a certain goal, nope, you can't do any corrective action. If you do, we'll grieve it. Things like that. All the other stuff that comes into play also are things like accommodations for workers, and also other benefits that come into play. And of course, the biggie, wages, how you're going to be paid, how much you're going to be paid. These are important things to consider. The other thing you should understand with every union, whether you are a part of one or not, you will pay the union due. So you have to pay it. That's where some companies, and in particular I'll mention Walmart again, tend to say that that's a business. No, it's not. It's a due. You're paying an organization to represent you. They're a collective unit that is bargaining on your behalf, so they need money to pay for doing things. And also, in the event that you go on strike, you have to have a strike fund so you can pay those strikers some money to live. People have to still live, so there's a strike pay that gets doled out to people who are on the picket line. The other thing too, if you are certified as a union in a call center and you go on strike, whether you're in the union or out of the union, you're on strike. So if you cross the picket line and that's your choice to make, you will be basically facing some pretty rough rides, because crossing the picket line is an affront. It's an absolute affront to somebody who's in the union. You don't do it. I'm a non-unionized person. If I were going to, say, a Metro right now who are on strike these days, I wouldn't cross their picket line to try and go in the store. Anyway, the stores are closed. neither here nor there, but the bottom line is I wouldn't cross their picket line because it's an affront to them. They would not be happy if people attempted to do that. And it could get pretty wild to the point of a little bit of pushing and shoving, which I don't agree with, but hey, it gets pretty heated at times. So you would have to avoid doing that. If you did go across the picket line, you'd be known as a scab employee, and that's, again, going to probably affect you and your work down the line because you may not be welcomed as well or in future in the call center after everybody comes back. So you're going to have to try and patch those differences up and explain yourself to your colleagues who are unionized to stay on that picket line. So there's things like that to really, truly, and honestly consider when doing this. So my takeaway on this as far as going forward with any kind of unionization, for outbound call centers, I would say it's not probably a good bet. It's probably not something you want to go forward with. For inbound call centers, it's probably a good bet, but you have to make sure that when you do the collective bargaining sessions, that you basically look at things really critically and understand that you're not going to be able to get everything you want. So, for example, again, I'll go back to the CSAT point. Corrective action is allowed at one point. You have to allow the company to say something about a behavior that is not working that you want to work. So you can't let an employee get away with 50% CSAT. That's not acceptable, because basically the client, if you're specifically working with one, is not going to be happy with you and eventually will take their business away from you. So you want to ensure that you're still measuring a particular thing they want, which is customer satisfaction, to a level that they want, basically because they want their customers to be happy. And you know what? You should want the customer to be happy too. So the bottom line here is you want to make sure that that's there. So you have to give that back to the company. But certainly, if it's only like 5 or 10% off, yeah, you might say, no, we'll brief that corrective action. You can't. And we'll get that employee reinstated by whatever means necessary. If even it has to go to an arbiter, which another time down the road you might have to do, particularly in a strike situation. You might have to go to the Labor Relations Board and arbitrate things. So that's another thing too to consider. There are a lot of impacts, a lot of factors that come into this. So you want to really truly consider all of the things and weigh them very, very carefully to ensure that what you're doing is correct. Again, I want to, for generalistic purposes, state these are facts. Whether you decide you want to or not, joining a union is going to have impacts, and not joining a union is also going to have impacts as well. You have to understand, if you decide and you talk about it and it comes into the call center and managers hear about this, it's going to create a bit of a crisis point for them, and there might be conversations about why this conversation is happening. But if you're a manager and you're hearing grumblings about people not happy and considering, or even hearing on the outside, staff saying in the coffee shop, yeah, I'm thinking that maybe we want a union in our center, this is the time for you to take action, not against them, but proactively sitting down with your staff and saying, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to go forward? What are we doing that's causing you to want to go forward with this particular process? Is there something that we can do to fix this so that we can partner together and work in a proactive manner? What I want to say here in all the conversations I have, particularly in this podcast, is my main mantra between managers and people working on the phones is this: the two need to symbiotically work together and coexist. Collaboration versus confrontation, that's the key message I want. Do you want to be collaborative? My hope is you do. Because the bottom line is, if you're not collaborative, you're combative, and you're not going to win at the end of the day. You may get everything for the most part, but only for a while, and then eventually your call center will go, and I've seen it happen, gone, because it's short money. But if you have collaborative staff, if you have people working with you, you're going to go a long way. The campaign that I've worked on, I've been with for 8 years. we're doing relatively well. We're doing okay. There's some things that need improvement, but we are doing relatively well because people cooperate and collaborate. And we actually just recently got somebody in our company who's now our senior operations manager, who's trying to basically steer the ship, if you will, in a direction that's more collaborative, which is awesome. That's what we want. That's what you want as an employer, and that's what you want as a staff member. Confrontation is not healthy, particularly in a call center. So that's my takeaway on all of this. I want to say thank you again for listening to this particular episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've learned something a little bit about unions and about what to expect if you're going to be doing that within the call center industry. That said, I'm going to duck out of here, and I wish you a really great rest of your day. Thanks again. We'll see you in the next episode of Tales from the Cube. Take care. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks for listening to Tales from the Cube. You can hear us on all the major podcast platforms such as Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, and wherever else you listen to podcasts. We'll see you in the next episode.